Hey guys, and welcome to the 8th video in this multi-part series on how to study words for tournament Scrabble. In this video, we'll be rounding out the approximately 25,000 words that I have recommended as the most useful for any tournament Scrabble players to know, and we will be dealing with one very large chunk of words that we have yet to address, which is all of the remaining 5-letter words in this video. We'll also be tackling some of the most useful 6-letter words, namely those including power tiles as well as those including a lot of vowels. But we'll be focusing the most on the 5s in this video as they're a particularly difficult chunk of words to deal with. Now, the 5s sort of fall in the middle ground between the shorter words and the bingos, and because of that, they can be notoriously hard to retain, even for top experts. I myself have definitely made plenty of mistakes on the 5-letter words, even after having studied them all multiple times. And I think part of the reason that they're so difficult is they're longer than the 3s or the 4s, so because of that, they're a little bit harder to memorize, and they also don't come up quite as often, especially a lot of the ones that have duplicate tiles or more clunky tiles. So the 3s and the 4s, not only are they easier to learn, but you'll also be seeing them in actual play more often, and that'll help you retain them. And then on the flip side, say compared to the higher probability bingos, I feel like the 5s all kind of blend together a little bit more, since you don't have such a clear distinction of probability by which you can determine which are more likely to come up in the game. With something like the 5s or the 4s, it doesn't really make sense to study by probability, because actually the highest probability 5s, something like inter maybe, I-N-T-E-R, don't come up often at all, because it's very rare you're actually going to play a 5 with those tiles. Normally, you're going to be trying to hold on to a strong lead and going for a bingo. So ironically, actually, sometimes the lower probability 5s actually come up in games more often, which makes it very difficult to figure out a methodical way for studying them. And with the 2s and the 3s, there's a fairly small number of words, so it's pretty easy to go through them all at once. The 4s are a little trickier. We discussed in the last video one viable way of studying them, which was to sort of split them up alphabetically, which is how I memorized the 4s. I'll be talking about a different method for the 5s today, which involves splitting them up by the number of anagrams. That method could also be used for the 4s if you go back to a couple videos ago. But I especially recommend it for the 5s just because there are so many words, and I find this number of anagrams method, which I'll be discussing in just a minute, helps me keep them straight. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So this table here shows the 5-letter words and basically how many there are based on the number of anagrams there are in a set. So of course what I mean by number of anagrams is, let's say I take any 5-letter word. If I take tulip, that would have 2 anagrams, because tulip and uplit are both valid 5s containing that set of letters, which would be I-L-P-T-U if I alphabetize them. So that would fall in this 2 anagram camp. So tulip and uplit would be, would be 2 of the 2,210 words that fall into the 2 anagram bucket. So as you can see, the number of anagrams, as that goes up, the number of words in that bucket tends to decrease, which isn't shocking because it's not easy to have 6 or 7 or even more than that in terms of the number of words that you can make with a given set of tiles. So of course, the largest bucket by far is 5s with 1 anagram. And I would personally recommend saving these for last and sort of working bottom to top on this list. And actually, even though there's only a couple hundred words in some of these ladder buckets, they can actually be kind of annoying to learn, because there's just so many words, and trying to remember all of them at once from a given rack can be fairly annoying. But I find that once you've gone through the 5s with like 6, 7, or 8 anagrams, then that just makes the other ones a little bit easier to get through. So I find if you go from the bottom to the top of this list, then that just makes the whole process a little bit easier, and then you'll hopefully have some recollection too of which bucket each word fell into. And that'll sometimes help later with recall too. Like if you have a rack and you're trying to remember or figure out what 5s you might be able to play from the rack, you'll maybe see the rack and remember, wait, I think there were 4 anagrams in that rack, and that'll maybe help you either determine all of your options or remember whether something you're not sure of is valid or not. This can also be very useful if your opponent plays a word, especially let's say they put an S on the 4 already on the board, and you can't remember if that takes an S, and they're fairly common letters. Maybe you can remember that those set of 5 tiles had 3 anagrams from your studies if you use this method, and you immediately see 3 other anagrams you know are valid, well, then you know that that S hook can't be valid, or else it would constitute a 4th anagram, and then you can challenge it off the board. So that I found was also something that I gained a lot from using this method for the 5s. And once again, you could definitely use this for the 4s too. I just found for the 4s, there were a small enough number of words, and I personally didn't have that hard or as hard a time keeping track of them. So I generally prefer doing them alphabetically, which also has its benefits, right? Since you can sometimes remember if you do it alphabetically, like, wait a minute, I don't remember seeing this word that starts with an F in my study of 4-letter words that start with Fs. So things like that can help too. And you can use that method for 5s as well if you prefer. I think both methods are very effective for splitting up these short to moderate length words, but personally for 5s, I use the number of anagrams method, so that's what I'll be talking about in this video. So yeah, this is basically the table here, and like I said, I would personally recommend going bottom to top. I think if you start with the 1 anagram 5s, given there's 5,000 words, it'll just be a little bit overwhelming, and if you tackle the ones with many anagrams first, it'll just make the process of reducing the number of anagrams a little less daunting with each step, and just make the whole process go a little bit more smoothly. So with all that in mind, let's now take a look at how you would do this in practice in Zyzzyva. So as usual with Zyzzyva, we're going to want to use this search feature over here. And in order to filter for 5 other words that have a specific number of anagrams, we're just going to go to length over here. And then, of course, make this 5 other words. And then we're going to use this bottom condition here, which is number of anagrams. So if I want to start at the very bottom, which was 7 plus anagrams, I'm just going to change this minimum number to 7. And then you'll see after I do a search that there are 189 total words. And of course, as you can see, all of these words here have many different anagrams, and they tend to have very good letters too. So what you're going to do here is very similar to the process we've used for other words. Just basically read through all of these. A lot of them are going to be common, but there are going to be some more obscure words as well, and just kind of scroll through this list. And then once you're done reading through and feel like you've seen all of them at least once, you're going to just create a quiz from this list. And you'll see, even though there's 189 words, there's not a lot of questions, right? There's only 25 questions. And that's because all of these words have so many anagrams. And I find for these, the 5s with like 6 or 7 anagrams, it is important to type these out just to make sure you're keeping yourself honest. If you try to use the flashcard mode here, it can be easy to trip up just because there's so many and think you got it when you didn't. So I think for these, it's really important to type them out. So for this one, you would type out riots, and trios, and so on and so forth. And this way too, if you mess up, then it'll sort of drill that into your mind. Like, I know for this one, I've definitely messed up thinking that Tories is a word. And Tory is a word, but it's a plural of Taurus, so it does not take an S. So if I were to type in Tories, it would tell me that I'm incorrect over here. And then what I'm going to do after that happens is I'll mark it as missed, and then I'll review all of these, and then later on when I'm doing my missed quiz, I'll see that all 7 of these words come up in the mark as in the missed section over here. So this will be good so that when I retake the missed quiz, I'm going to have to do this process all over again, and that'll really help me drill into my mind that whatever I entered incorrectly, in this case Tories, is not a valid word. So so especially, again, with the 5s that have many, many anagrams, I highly recommend not using the flashcard mode and typing them out if at all possible. But yeah, basically, that's what you're going to do for each of the rows in the table. So once you've gone through all the 5s with 7 or more anagrams, I would do the 5s with 6 anagrams. If you feel like it, you can lump a few of these together too. If you wanted to, you could maybe do 5s with either 5 or 6 anagrams. That's fine, although, like I said, I do think it's nice to have some more specific association of a certain pair of letters with how many anagrams there are, just to, like I said, be able to help keep them straight in a game, and also be able to challenge off hooks that your opponents might make, or other 5-letter plays your opponents might make, just based on your specific memory of how many anagrams there are in that rack. So I don't necessarily recommend this, but if you really feel compelled to, you could bucket the different rows in that table. But for this example, I'll just do the number of anagrams equals 6, and I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to read through all of these, and then do that iterative quizzing process we've been talking about in all of these videos, where I go through the quiz and then repeatedly go through all of the words that I missed. And you're going to do this for all of the different fives with various numbers of anagrams until you get to the largest set, which is fives with a single anagram. And this set is going to be large, right? As we mentioned, it's about 5,000 words. So it's going to take a while to get through this. And you could just sort of go through this whole list in one bucket, like by reading them and then doing a quiz. I think that's what I did. But you could also split this list up even further if you found the 500 words to be, or 5,000 words to be a little bit too daunting. You could subdivide this further, perhaps alphabetically, similarly to what we did by the fours. So let's say you did decide to split it up alphabetically, then you would use the same method that we did for the fours with a pattern match. So let's say you want to start with the five starting with A, B, or C, then you would do this and then 4 blanks. Make sure you keep the number of anagrams criterion as 1-to-1, because otherwise you'll start getting those fives that you've already studied with multiple anagrams. So here now I've reduced it to 1,000 or so words. So it'll just be a little bit more manageable of a set than doing 5,000 words at once. Again, not necessarily required that you split them up alphabetically, but I think 5,000 is probably a lot of words to go through at once. And it does just add that extra layer of stratification for yourself later on if you're trying to remember if something is a word. So yeah, definitely I recommend splitting by number of anagrams, and then if you feel the need, or if you feel it helps, then of course feel free to split further by alphabetic order like such. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the fives. And then once you've gone through all of the fives in this fashion, then I would recommend doing one very large quiz on all of the 5-letter words. So I'm just going to generate that here, and then this is of course going to be a large quiz, right? It's going to have about 9,000 words, so it's going to take a while to go through this quiz, probably several days, if not a week, depending on the pace you're going through. At this point, you can probably just switch to flashcard mode, since you'll have seen all the fives and gotten them all correct at least once, and then go through this quiz as usual. Make sure you use the save quiz feature to save your progress at any given point during the quiz. But yeah, that pretty much covers the fives. For the larger quiz at the end, you could also do it on Aerolith if you wanted. I haven't really been showing Aerolith as much on the latest videos. I find it's generally more useful for reviewing or for some of the shorter words, just because typing out all of the longer words can get a bit cumbersome. But it should go without saying that for any of these lists, if you generally do prefer learning them, or especially reviewing them on Aerolith, then you can just use the same methods that we discussed in the previous videos. It's basically the same principles, right, where you generate the word list and then go through it iteratively, and then making sure you review the ones that you missed. But yeah, the tools are generally fairly interchangeable. I personally do just tend to prefer Zyzzyva, so that's what I've been showing more lately, but it should go without saying that if you prefer the interface on Aerolith, then by all means feel free to go ahead and use that. So that pretty much covers the fives. There was the other list in this video which I want to briefly touch on, which is the useful sixes. So as we've discussed for the useful fives and fours, those are going to be 6-letter words that either contain a J, Q, X, or Z, or 6-letter words that contain 4 vowels. And you're going to use basically the same process that we've been using for the useful fours and fives for this one, so there's not too much to add here. You're going to just search for all the 6-letter words. We'll start first with the high point sixes, so you'll do consists of at least 1% of J, Q, X, Z, and then you'll see that there are about 1,300 words in this list. So this is going to be the larger of the two lists, and it doesn't really matter whether you just do this list first or the vowel-heavy sixes first. You're going to ultimately be going through both, and it's hard to say which one is really more useful. So you can go through either of these, and then you're going to basically just do the same thing. Just read through the entire list once or twice, and then quiz yourself on it, and sort of just keep going through that quiz over and over until you feel like you have a pretty good handle on them. And then, yeah, once again, for the vowel-heavy sixes, you're going to do number of vowels is at least 4. And this list is exactly 300 words, so not as long a list as the high point sixes, but again, you're going to do the same thing here. Just read through the entire list a couple of times over, and then do the quizzing process where you go through the list and then review all of the missed words until you've gotten through the whole list and gotten all the words correct at least 1 or 2 times, and you should have a pretty good handle on them after doing that. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. At this point, we've been through all but the final row of this table. So we've covered about 25,000 words. And if you've learned all of these words and you have a pretty strong grasp on all of them, especially some of the ones earlier in this list, then I can definitely guarantee you that you'll be seeing drastic improvements in your Scrabble game and probably starting to compete at a pretty solid intermediate to lower advanced level in tournaments. There are many players in the even towards the upper reaches in Scrabble that mess up on words within one of these subsets quite regularly, and even myself included. I've certainly been known to make some mistakes, especially on fives, like I said, and even occasionally on some of the higher probability bingos. So they're really important, and if you can learn all these words, they'll really give you a great leg up on a lot of your competition. And we will have one more video coming up on the final row of this table, which is the largest row by far. It's a whopping 65,000 words. However, it's important to mention that the 25,000 we've already covered are by far the most useful and by far the ones that will come up the most often and help you the most. So there's definitely, to use sort of a economics term, diminishing marginal utility the deeper you go beyond this. So this is definitely a good stopping point for a lot of folks. But if you want to go deeper and try to really raise the bar, and especially if you have aspirations of becoming a strong expert, then you will need to go on to the next row of 65,000 words, and it's going to look pretty similar to some of the previous videos in terms of the process, but we will have one more video on that for good measure. So if that interests you, then please join me for the 9th and final video of this series on the final 65,000 words, which will be coming out shortly. So thanks again for watching, guys, and hope this video was useful, and I'll see you guys soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.